Jake Sullivan wiped the hydraulic fluid from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, squinting at the docking bay's chronometer through the perpetual haze of recycled air and mechanical exhaust. Another 16-hour shift at Haven's Rest was crawling toward its merciful end, and his lower back reminded him with every movement that 43 was too old to be crawling through cargo hauler maintenance shafts. "Hey Jake, you gonna fix my atmospheric scrubber sometime this century, or should I just start breathing vacuum for kicks?" Captain Rodriguez called from across the bay, gesturing at his battered freight runner with theatrical exasperation. "Your scrubber's been held together by prayer and duct tape since the Clinton administration," Jake called back. Not looking up from the plasma conduit, he was wrestling into submission. "I told you last week. You need a complete atmospheric overhaul, not another Band-Aid job." "Clinton, which one? There've been like 4 of them by now." Jake paused his work to give Rodriguez a withering look. "The point is, your ship's older than dirt and twice as stubborn. Give me another day and I'll have her breathing sweet as a baby's bottom." The familiar banter echoed across the docking bay, mixing with the constant background symphony of humming power cores, hissing pneumatic systems, and the occasional creative cursing from other mechanics battling their own mechanical demons. Haven's Rest operated on the principle that if something wasn't actively exploding, it was probably working well enough to ignore for another few months. That philosophy served Jake well enough until the morning when everything changed. The first sign of trouble wasn't the exotic energy signature that made the station's sensors hiccup and stutter. It wasn't even the sleek vessel that slid through the docking bay's atmospheric barrier like liquid mercury, its hull reflecting the harsh industrial lighting in patterns that seemed to shift and flow. No, the first sign of real trouble was the absolute silence that fell over the normally raucous docking bay as every mechanic, trader and ne'er-do-well stopped what they were doing to stare. "Well, that's new," Jake muttered, setting down his plasma torch and wiping his hands again on the increasingly futile rag. The ship settling onto landing pad 7 was unlike anything in his 20-year career of fixing, cursing at, and occasionally threatening mechanical devices with percussive maintenance. The vessel's lines flowed with an organic grace that made human engineering look like it had been assembled by enthusiastic children with welding torches. No visible seams marked its hull, and the soft blue glow emanating from what might charitably be called Windows suggested technology that operated on principles Jake's technical manuals probably didn't even have words for. 50 credits says it explodes within the hour, Rodriguez offered, his voice carrying the hopeful tone of someone who'd bet against his own grandmother if the odds were right. "No bet," Jake replied, grabbing his diagnostic kit and approaching the alien craft with the same careful optimism he reserved for diffusing unstable plasma charges. "But if it does explode, I'm claiming salvage rights on whatever's left." The ship's entry ramp descended with a whisper of perfectly balanced hydraulics, releasing a faint harmonic hum that made Jake's fillings ache in a not entirely unpleasant way. What emerged from the craft made him forget all about dental discomfort. She was tall, elegant, and moved with the kind of fluid grace that suggested either extensive dance training or genetic modifications Jake couldn't begin to imagine. Her clothing looked practical enough, a fitted jacket and pants in deep blue fabric that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. But something about the cut and craftsmanship screamed expensive in at least 3 languages. The ears gave her away as definitely not human, extending upward in elegant points that added an almost ethereal quality to features that were otherwise familiar enough. She surveyed the docking bay with eyes that missed nothing, and when her gaze settled on Jake, he felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like expensive education filtered through several centuries of linguistic evolution. "I require assistance with my vessel. The quantum drive has suffered what I believe your people would call a cascade failure." Jake blinked, processing the casual mention of technology that existed mainly in theoretical physics journals and the fever dreams of engineering students. Quantum drive. Right, of course it has. He gestured vaguely at the gleaming ship. Well, ma'am, I have to tell you up front that my experience with quantum drives is mostly limited to reading about them in technical manuals while eating lunch. But I'm pretty good with most things that have moving parts and a power source. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Moving parts. Figure of speech. Energy matrices, quantum fluctuation dampeners, probability wave generators. They're all just moving parts when you get right down to it. Some of them just move through dimensions I can't see without expensive equipment. Jake shouldered his diagnostic kit and grinned. Name's Jake Sullivan, and I'm either exactly what you need or about to make your day significantly worse. What should I call you? Lyra, she replied, extending a hand that felt surprisingly warm and solid. And I suspect you may be more capable than you realize, Jake Sullivan. Well, Lyra, let's take a look under the hood and see what kind of impossibly advanced alien technology we're dealing with here. Fair warning, though, I've been known to fix things by hitting them with wrenches, so if your quantum drive is sensitive to percussive maintenance, now would be a good time to mention it. Her laugh was genuine and surprisingly infectious. I shall keep that in mind. As they approached her ship, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this routine repair call was about to become significantly less routine. The energy readings alone were enough to make his diagnostic equipment weep in confusion, and he hadn't even seen the inside yet. So, Lyra, what brings you to our little corner of nowhere? Haven's Rest isn't exactly a prime destination for, well, anybody really. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries are found in the most unexpected places, she replied, watching him work with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging his every movement. Jake nodded sagely. True wisdom. Although around here, the most interesting discoveries usually involve finding out which idiot forgot to properly secure a cargo container full of Rigelian beetle larvae. Again. The memory of that particular incident still made him shudder. Some discoveries, he reflected, were significantly more interesting than others. The interior of Lyra's ship made Jake feel like he'd accidentally wandered into a museum exhibit titled, What Humans Will Build in 300 Years, if They're Lucky. Every surface gleamed with that particular shine that suggested materials science had progressed well beyond anything his workshop manual covered. Okay, so where's the engine room? Jake asked, rotating slowly to take in the seamless walls and softly pulsing conduits that seemed to run through the bulkheads like luminous veins. Please tell me it's not one of those ships where the entire vessel is technically the engine. The quantum core is located in the aft section, Lyra replied, leading him through a corridor that curved in ways that shouldn't have been possible given the ship's external dimensions. Though I should warn you, the containment field generators are still active. The quantum foam tends to make some humans feel unsettled. Quantum foam, Jake nodded as if this were perfectly normal. Right. Is that the technical term, or are we talking about something that actually foams? Because I once had to clean quantum beer foam out of a cargo hold, and let me tell you, that stuff defies at least 3 laws of physics. Lyra paused mid-step. Quantum beer. Don't ask. The less said about the Centauri brewing experiments, the better. Just know that alcohol and exotic matter don't mix well, and the cleanup involves a lot of paperwork with the Hazardous Materials Authority. They entered what Jake assumed was the engine room, though it looked more like the inside of a particularly artistic particle accelerator. A sphere of contained energy hovered in the center of the chamber, surrounded by rings of what appeared to be crystalline matrices that rotated through dimensions his eyes couldn't quite follow. Well, that's definitely broken, Jake observed, watching sparks of exotic energy cascade from several of the rotating rings. The quantum whatsits are doing that flashy thing that usually means something expensive just stopped working. The cascade resonance destabilized the quantum substrate, Lyra explained, producing a handheld device that projected holographic readouts in symbols Jake couldn't read but somehow understood meant, everything is terrible. In layman's terms, your quantum foam analogy was more accurate than you realized. The drive is essentially foaming itself to death. Jake set down his diagnostic kit and pulled out his favorite multi-tool, a battered device that had served him faithfully through everything from plasma conduit repairs to emergency sandwich preparation. Okay, quantum foaming. I can work with that. First rule of fixing things that foam when they shouldn't: stop the foaming. He approached the containment field with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades convincing reluctant machinery to cooperate. The energy readings on his scanner made sounds that were either highly concerning or indicated his equipment was having an existential crisis. Jake, Lyra said carefully, perhaps we should consult the technical specifications before. Specifications are for people who build things correctly the first time, Jake interrupted, studying the exotic matter flow patterns with the same expression he used when diagnosing a stubborn atmospheric recycler. Your quantum foam is backing up here, see? The exotic matter isn't cycling properly through the substrate matrix. He pointed at a section of the crystalline ring structure, where the energy flow clearly stuttered and sparked. It's like a clogged drain, except instead of hair and soap scum, we're dealing with probability waves and quantum uncertainty. That's actually a remarkably accurate analogy, Lyra admitted, watching him work with growing fascination. Everything's just plumbing when you get down to it. Doesn't matter if you're moving water, plasma, or quantum foam, the principles are the same. Find the blockage, clear the blockage, curse creatively when the blockage fights back. Jake pulled out what appeared to be an ordinary wrench, but had been modified with enough exotic attachments to qualify as either a precision instrument or a medieval torture device. Now, I'm going to try something that will either fix your quantum drive or accidentally create a small black hole. Either way, it should be educational. Should I be concerned about the black hole possibility? No. If I create a black hole, it'll be too small to do any real damage. Probably just suck up some loose bolts and maybe that sandwich I left in the toolbox last week. Jake positioned his improvised quantum wrench near the stuttering energy matrix. Though if you hear reality start making that weird ripping sound, you might want to step back a few feet. The modification process involved a combination of careful energy realignment, percussive maintenance applied at quantum frequencies, and what Jake liked to call therapeutic swearing at inanimate objects. Throughout the procedure, Lyra found herself simultaneously horrified and impressed by his unorthodox approach to technology that represented the pinnacle of her civilization's engineering achievements. You know, Jake said conversationally, while coaxing a particularly stubborn quantum resonance cascade back into alignment, I once had to fix a gravity generator that had gotten stuck in reverse. Spent 3 days working on the ceiling while everything else in the room floated around like a zero-G ballet. The captain kept floating by asking when I'd be done, and I kept telling him I'd be done when the laws of physics started cooperating again. How did you resolve the situation? Turned out someone had installed the graviton flow regulator upside down. Amazing how often complex problems have simple solutions. Jake gave the quantum matrix a final adjustment and stepped back as the energy flows stabilized into smooth, coherent patterns. Of course, sometimes simple problems have complex solutions too. Like that time, I spent 6 hours trying to figure out why a perfectly good atmospheric processor wouldn't start, only to discover someone had unplugged it. The quantum drive hummed to life, with a sound like crystalline wind chimes, having a philosophical discussion about the nature of existence. The exotic matter flows settled into steady, healthy rhythms, and the quantum foam stopped foaming quite so dramatically. There we go, Jake said with satisfaction, wiping his hands on his perpetually stained rag. One quantum drive, defoamed and back to violating the laws of physics in a properly controlled manner. Lyra stared at the now functioning drive core, then at Jake, then back at the drive core. You fixed it. Well, yeah, that's what mechanics do. We fix things. Jake began packing up his tools with the casual efficiency of long practice. Though I have to say, this was definitely more interesting than my usual Tuesday. Most days it's just plasma conduits and atmospheric scrubbers. You have no idea what you've just accomplished, do you? Jake paused in his tool gathering to give her a curious look. I fixed your quantum drive so you can get back to wherever you were going before you broke down in our neighborhood. Pretty standard customer service, really. The expression on Lyra's face suggested she was wrestling with concepts that didn't translate well into standard customer service terminology. But Jake was already moving on to more practical matters. So, what's the damage going to be? I'm thinking about 2 days of labor, plus the cost of the quantum stabilization matrix I had to jury-rig out of spare parts. Nothing too exotic, just some reconfigured plasma conduits and a modified gravity lens I had lying around from my last impossible repair job. 3 days had passed since Jake first laid hands on Lyra's quantum drive, and the novelty of working on impossibly advanced alien technology had settled into the comfortable rhythm of any complex repair job. He'd spent the better part of those days elbow-deep in exotic matter conduits, making friends with probability matrices, and having philosophical discussions with quantum stabilizers about their purpose in life. You know what your problem is, Jake said to the quantum core, which was currently humming with perfect harmonic resonance for the first time since Lyra's arrival. You're over-engineered. Back home, we'd accomplish the same thing with 3 moving parts and a roll of duct tape. Is that your professional assessment? Lyra asked from where she sat observing his work, her presence having become as routine as the morning shift change on Haven's Rest. Absolutely. Your people have a serious case of technological perfectionism. This drive could probably run the entire station for a century without maintenance, but heaven forbid one quantum flux capacitor gets out of alignment. Jake wiped his hands and surveyed his handiwork with satisfaction. Still, I have to admit, once you get past all the fancy quantum mechanics, it's actually pretty elegant. Over the past 3 days, their conversations had meandered through topics ranging from comparative engineering philosophies to Jake's increasingly creative theories about why alien technology always seemed to involve gratuitous amounts of blue light. Lyra had proven to be an unexpectedly good audience for his mechanical philosophizing, laughing at his jokes about quantum uncertainty principles, and nodding seriously when he explained his theory that all advanced civilizations eventually discovered the universal constant of percussive maintenance. I've been thinking, Jake said, running one final diagnostic on the quantum matrix stabilizers, about your earlier comment regarding payment. You keep offering me these astronomical sums, but honestly, parts and labor for this job shouldn't run more than a few thousand credits. Maybe a bonus for the educational value, but nothing that would let me retire to my own personal asteroid. Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. You truly have no idea what this means to me, do you? Lady, you were stranded at a nowhere trading station with a broken quantum drive. I fixed your quantum drive. Now you can go back to doing whatever it is you do when you're not stuck in mechanical limbo. Jake shrugged. It's not exactly rocket science. Well, technically it is rocket science, but you know what I mean. Jake Sullivan, Lyra said carefully, what do you know about the political situation in this sector? I know the coffee's overpriced, the bureaucrats are undertrained, and somebody keeps stealing my good wrenches from the community tool locker. Jake sealed the final access panel and stepped back from the quantum core. Politics isn't really my department. I fix things, not governments. And if I told you that my being stranded here for 3 days has probably caused several interstellar incidents, and at least one minor diplomatic crisis. Jake paused in his tool gathering to give her a skeptical look. I'd say you either have a really important job or a seriously inflated sense of your own importance. No offense. None taken. Jake, I need to show you something. Lyra moved to the ship's central console and activated what appeared to be a standard communication array. The holographic display that materialized above the projector showed a tactical readout of local space that made Jake's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. Okay, that's a lot of ships, he said, studying the dozens of contact markers converging on Haven's rest from multiple vectors. Big ships, really big ships. The kind of ships that usually mean someone's day is about to get significantly worse. The Asterian Imperial Fleet, Lyra said quietly. They're coming for me. Imperial Fleet. Jake's voice cracked slightly. As in, Empire. The kind with emperors and conquered planets and probably some very serious people who don't appreciate civilian mechanics poking around in their quantum drives. Something like that, yes. Jake sat down heavily on a nearby equipment crate, his mind racing through the implications. So when you said you needed help with your ship, what you actually meant was that you're some kind of alien royalty whose disappearance has probably launched a few hundred warships and possibly started an interstellar war. That's not entirely inaccurate. And I've spent the last 3 days treating you like any other customer with a broken-down ship, complaining about your people's engineering choices, and charging you standard labor rates for what was probably the equivalent of performing surgery on the crown jewels. Yes, Jake looked at the tactical display again, where the Imperial fleet was now close enough that individual ship classes were visible. Dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and what appeared to be an entire carrier group were converging on their position with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't a social call. Well, he said finally, this is either going to be really exciting or really fatal, possibly both. Jake, I need you to understand something. My name is Lyra Valdris. I'm the Empress of the Asterian hegemony, and for the past 3 days, you've been fixing the personal transport of one of the most powerful beings in known space. The silence that followed this revelation lasted approximately 15 seconds before Jake started laughing. Not the polite chuckle of someone trying to diffuse tension, but the genuine, helpless laughter of someone whose reality had just taken a sharp left turn into the impossible. Empress, he wheezed between fits of laughter. Of course you're an empress. I should have known when you didn't complain about my labor rates. You're taking this remarkably well. Lady, sorry, Your Imperial Majesty. I once spent an entire afternoon arguing with a cargo hauler's navigation computer about the shortest route between 2 points. It kept insisting that the universe was actually shaped like a pretzel and that we should navigate accordingly. Compared to that, finding out I've been giving mechanical advice to alien royalty is practically mundane. Jake, those ships out there, they've been searching for me for 3 days. My disappearance has probably destabilized half a dozen trade agreements and sent the diplomatic corps into full panic mode. So what you're telling me is that not only am I about to meet what amounts to an alien navy, but I'm probably going to have to explain to them why their empress has been hanging around a greasy docking bay listening to me complain about quantum engineering principles. Something like that, yes. Jake stood up and shouldered his tool kit with the resignation of someone who'd long ago accepted that his life rarely proceeded according to plan. Well, Your Majesty, I guess we'd better get you back to your empire before they decide to redecorate Haven's rest with laser fire. Jake, before they arrive, I want you to know. Save the speeches for after we don't get vaporized by your rescue fleet, Jake interrupted, heading for the ship's exit. Though I have to ask, does this mean I can put Imperial Starship Mechanic on my business cards? Because that's got to be worth at least a 10% markup on future jobs. Lyra's laughter followed him out of the engine room, mixing with the growing hum of quantum drives powering up across the system, as the Asterian Imperial fleet prepared to reclaim their missing empress. The transformation of Haven's Rest from sleepy trading outpost to the center of interstellar attention happened with the kind of swift efficiency that made Jake wonder if he should have charged Lyra extra for the excitement surcharge. Within hours of the Imperial fleet's arrival, the station buzzed with more activity than it had seen since the great Rigelian beetle larvae incident of 2387. Jake Sullivan announced the imposing figure in pristine military uniform who'd introduced himself as Admiral Thorne. "You are either the luckiest civilian in known space or the most catastrophically unlucky, depending on your perspective." "I'm leaning toward unlucky," Jake replied, watching through the observation deck's viewport as ships the size of city blocks maneuvered around Haven's Rest with delicate precision. "Though I have to admit, the view's pretty spectacular." The past week had been a whirlwind of diplomatic protocols, media interviews, and increasingly surreal conversations with beings who casually discussed the fate of solar systems over lunch. Jake had discovered that fixing an Empress's quantum drive apparently qualified as a significant diplomatic event, complete with formal ceremonies and paperwork that existed in languages he couldn't pronounce. "The Empress wishes to see you," Admiral Thorne continued, "for the final ceremony. Let me guess, more speeches about interstellar friendship and the noble art of mechanical repair." "Something like that." Jake found Lyra in what had once been Haven's Rest's modest conference room, now transformed into something resembling a diplomatic throne room through the liberal application of holographic projectors and enough alien dignitaries to populate a small moon. She wore robes that managed to look both regal and practical, though Jake noticed she'd kept the same worn boots she'd arrived in. "Jake," she said, rising from what appeared to be a chair made of crystallized starlight, "I believe we have some unfinished business. If this is about the final bill, I already told your accountant that I'm not charging extra for the media circus. Though I might start if Rodriguez doesn't stop trying to sell interviews about my friend Jake, the Empress Whisperer." The assembled dignitaries, a collection of beings representing dozens of species and political entities, watched this exchange with the fascination of anthropologists observing a particularly unusual cultural ritual. "Jake Sullivan," Lyra announced formally, "in recognition of your service to the Asterian hegemony and your demonstration of the finest qualities of human ingenuity and character, I hereby present you with the Order of the Stellar Wrench." She produced a medallion that looked suspiciously like it had been crafted from spare parts from her quantum drive, arranged in patterns that suggested both mechanical function and artistic beauty. "This is a completely fictitious honor that I invented specifically for you, since our existing award seemed inadequate for someone who fixes impossible things with impossible tools." "The Order of the Stellar Wrench," Jake repeated, accepting the medallion with appropriate solemnity. "I have to say, Your Majesty, that's probably the most accurate award I've ever received. Does it come with a pension plan?" "Better. It comes with a job offer." The room fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of quantum drives holding position in local space. "You see, Jake, in the course of our conversations over the past week, I've learned that the Asterian hegemony has a significant problem. We have the most advanced technology in known space, but we've somehow forgotten how to fix things when they break in creative ways. Our engineers are trained to replace components, not convince them to cooperate through percussive maintenance and creative swearing. You want me to teach alien mechanics how to hit things with wrenches? I want you to establish the first human technical consultation service within Asterian space, a facility where human mechanical philosophy can be applied to problems that conventional engineering can't solve." Jake looked around the room at the assembled dignitaries, many of whom represented civilizations that had been building starships when humanity was still figuring out fire. You want me to set up shop in alien space and charge interstellar rates for the kind of repairs I do here? Essentially, yes, though the facilities will be somewhat more advanced than your current workshop. Will I still be able to complain about over-engineered alien technology? I would be disappointed if you didn't. Jake considered the offer while absently polishing his new medallion with the same rag he'd been using for the past decade. The order of the stellar wrench caught the light in patterns that seemed to shift and change, reflecting both his humble origins and his improbable future. All right, Your Majesty, you've got yourself a deal, but I have conditions. Name them. First, I get to bring my own tools. I don't care how advanced your fabrication technology is. Nothing replaces a wrench that's been properly broken in. Second, I get to keep using my diagnostic techniques, even if they involve talking to quantum matrices like they're misbehaving pets. And third, if anyone asks how I learned to fix impossible alien technology, I'm allowed to tell them it's all just plumbing when you get down to it. Agreed. The ceremony that followed was broadcast across both human and Asterian space, featuring Jake accepting his new position while wearing his best clean coveralls and delivering an impromptu speech about the universal principles of mechanical